What's up, everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about the state of finances in private practice. I am not an expert on the state of finances for folks working in private practice, but fortunately, the folks over at Herd conducted a survey now 2 years in a row asking you all about what the state of your finances are in private practice. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing Michael Fulwiler, who is the director of brand over at Herd, to ask about these results. And they're super interesting. So I'm excited to get into it. This is a data-filled episode, so I'm not going to jibber jabber any longer. Let's dive right into the interview where we talk about the state of finances in private practice. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael. I'm so excited to have you, and I'm so excited to learn about this information that you have to share today. But before we hop into these survey results that we're going to talk about, I wonder if you'd be willing to introduce yourself and say a little bit about Herd as well.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dr. Marie, for having me on. We appreciate your partnership and support of Herd. My name is Michael Fulwiler. I'm the director of brand at Herd. Herd is an accounting software company built specifically for therapists.
And we're so glad to have you. And you have some very intriguing survey results. So I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us what this survey is that you put out and a little bit of information about the intent and goals of doing this survey.
I'd love to. So, for the second year, Herd surveyed therapists nationwide and wrote up the survey results in what we called the financial state of private practice report. And so last year was the first year that we did it. And we had 1,200 survey results, which was really amazing. I didn't
Yeah,
know if we would get 100.
right.
And this year we had over 2,000. So
That's
pretty
amazing.
amazing turnout. Therapists from all 50 states. So really a representative nationwide sample from across disciplines as well: social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychologists, licensed mental health counselors. So really a wide range.
That's really wonderful. And I imagine I've looked through the results. It has such interesting and helpful information. So before we dive into it, I'll let folks know if you want to check out the survey results. I'll link to everything in the description of this so you can get the full report. But we'll touch on maybe some of the most interesting takeaways today. And Michael, I wonder if you'd be willing to share what you thought some of the key takeaways were from these results.
Sure. And to take a step back, like even why we did this in the first
Yeah.
place, right? There's really a lack of transparency when it comes to finances
Mm.
for therapy practices. People don't really talk about money. Maybe you'll see, people ask in Facebook groups and communities like how much you're charging. You kind of ask around, but you don't really know how businesses are actually doing, right? No one's talking about what their profits are or what their insurance reimbursement rates are. There's just like a lot of mystery around. And I feel like some of these conversations, they like happen in Reddit and it's just sort of anonymous, you know,
Yes.
threads, and so you don't really know like who to trust. So that was really the goal for this survey and report, was really to provide more transparency around how therapy businesses are doing around the
Hmm.
country, and how also like state to state that varies. And also I think that's very empowering for therapists, right? Because they're able to benchmark, okay, so this is what a typical therapist maybe in my state is earning. How is my business doing compared to that? So we asked, what their income was, what their expenses were, what their profit was. We asked, how many clients you're seeing. We surveyed group practice owners specifically. We also asked about insurance, if they take insurance or not, which insurance companies they're credentialed with, what their rates were. So really a lot of interesting insights. I think one of the big takeaways for me is that I think there's this misconception that therapists make a lot of money.
Mm. Ugh.
When therapists are
Don't
charging
even get me started.
150 $200 a session, I think people think, like the general public thinks, therapists must be making $200,000 $300,000 a year, right? Like, especially when you think about the salaries of physicians and doctors,
Hmm.
therapists must be comparable. But what we found was that 89% of therapists that we surveyed made under $100,000 in profit last year. So only 11%, about 10% of therapists made six figures. And that's something that we talked about. And you felt like that number was even high.
I did, and I still do. I have this curiosity of, like, if I polled my audience, would it be similar? So maybe that's something I might follow up on. Hello, this is Future Marie interrupting this episode because, yes, curiosity got the best of me. I put a poll out on Instagram a few days after we did this interview. 334 people responded, and answering the question, do you earn more than $100,000 a year in profits if you work in private practice? 22% of people responded yes, and 78% of people responded no. So I am glad that I was wrong about that, and the number is higher than I thought. Let's be honest, this number is still super low, and gosh, like, how are you paying all your bills and your debts? I don't know. Maybe we'll tackle that question in a different video, but for today, let's get back into the interview. It's sad that that was a happy surprise that, like,
Right.
basically 10% of people are earning
Yeah.
six figures.
Right. And I mean, to me, therapists should be making at least six figures, right? Like when you
Mhm.
compare to not just their counterparts in medicine, but in technology as well. In the industry that I work in, six figures can be an entry level salary for a
Right.
software engineer, right? So when you're
Mhm.
talking about a licensed mental health professional who has gone to graduate school, has done thousands of hours of supervision, right? For them to
And
be
hundreds
making
of
under.
thousands of student debt
Exactly.
you have
Yeah,
to pay off.
totally. So
Uh,
that to me, it wasn't a surprise. I think it like validated what we already knew, that
right.
therapists in general are underpaid within our
Yeah.
healthcare system. So that was definitely a big one. And then when we compared that to last year's survey results, so in 2022, 65% actually said that they made less than 100K. So there was more therapists that we surveyed, and it could have just been the sample size because it was smaller, but relatively, or at least
Mhm.
directionally, more therapists 2 years ago made over six figures in profit than last year. And that number was actually down 27%. A big part of that is that expenses are up. 56% of therapists said year over year their expenses have gone up. And that's just the economy, inflation, interest rates across the board. However, we asked therapists 2 years ago if they plan to increase their fees, right, to keep up with these expenses. 64% of therapists 2 years ago said, yes, I'm planning to increase my rates in 2023. When we asked them this year, did you increase your rates like you said you were going to? Only 33% did. So only 1 in 3 therapists increased their fees last year.
Yeah.
I'm curious your interpretation of that. My sense of that is there's probably some fear if I increase my rates, I might lose clients. And so I
Mhm.
want to like keep the clients that I have. And I think also
Yeah.
clients are struggling too.
Absolutely. I wasn't surprised when I saw that, and it was almost like it was so helpful to have numbers to align with this thing that we see over and over again of, like, if I'm projecting into my future as a therapist, of course I know I need to raise my rate. Yeah, we know about inflation and expenses, and also generally people get raises over time in their career and things like that. And then when the time comes to raise rates, it's not so easy anymore. Like,
Right.
"Oh,
It
no.
is, yeah, it's
What if I
hard to
l"
do. Yeah.
Yeah, so what if I lose clients over this? Or not even just lose clients, but your clients are people trying to make ends work, very much so, just like you are, right? So this, like, well, do I feel right increasing my rates when I know that this is already a stretch for my clients in general, or maybe you have specific clients in mind that you know it's going to be difficult for them, and so our heartstrings get tugged at so much because that's our job,
Right.
that it can just keep us staying in one spot, but eventually it really does start to become a problem because you got to make up for that money somewhere, take on more clients, or maybe you're stretched thin, you're taking on credit card debt, wherever it's going to give somewhere else. That's tough for a lot of us when it's time to raise our rates.
And if you're taking insurance, some insurance companies haven't raised their rates in years. I've talked to therapists who, it's been 10 years since their reimbursement rates have gone
Yeah,
up. And if you just account for inflation, I mean, you're essentially taking a pay cut.
a huge pay cut.
There's two other findings I wanted to share. One is we also asked about student loan debt, which you mentioned, 25%. So 1 in 4 of therapists that we surveyed, over 2,000 therapists said they had over $100,000 in student loan debt. And so when
Yeah.
you think about that, 25% owe more than $100,000 in student loans, yet only 11% are making over $100,000 a year. Like the path to pay that off feels very long.
The message that I hear from most of my therapist friends is, yeah, my student loan repayment, I just assume that that's an expense that I'll have for the rest of my life. You just pay it every
Right.
month, every month, every month. Ugh. It wears you down over time.
Yeah. And there's, some student loan forgiveness programs, which have been great. We'd love to see more of that specifically for mental health professionals. And
Absolutely.
then it was interesting when we looked at the average reimbursement rate for insurance. So across the board by insurance company and also nationwide, which we know it varies, right? Like insurance reimbursement rates, say in San Francisco or New York City, maybe higher than a more rural
Right.
area, but kind of on average. And to me, this was actually high. The
Mhm.
average insurance reimbursement rate per session for individual therapy was $122 per session.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, I've heard $75, $80, more in that
Right.
range.
Yes.
Um,
I was surprised seeing that too. I was
yeah,
thinking, I rarely hear people making more than $100. And
right.
so, but I believe the results. So,
But when you compare that to the average cash pay or out of network
oh, yes,
rate was $157. So it's 25% less. And I think it's probably even higher than that.
I
And
think so.
we know that, right? That
Yeah.
insurance underpays, you can make more by, going out of network, but just to see the data there too, it's just like very eye-opening.
I don't remember if you surveyed about this or not too, but if you bill insurance, you also have to account for either you're paying someone to do your billing
Yep,
for you, or if you do your own billing, that's also time in your schedule as well. So if you put it hour over hour, it's also less revenue as well.
totally.
Well, thank you. Already so much helpful information to just hear kind of the state of things. Are there other key takeaways that you want to go over?
We asked the average length of time that a therapist works with a client, which is an interesting data point. 58% of therapists said that on average they work with a client for less than a year. There are therapists who do more long-term therapy, of course, and then therapists who do more short-term, but about 50% of therapists turn clients over within 12 months. A takeaway for me there is it's important to continue marketing even when you're full, right? That I
Absolutely.
think it's easy maybe to take your foot off the gas a little bit and say, oh, my practice is full. I maybe don't need to do any marketing or networking. And well, if you don't have, consistent referrals and inquiries coming in, just accounting for, turnover in your caseload, I think
Absolutely. That
is
is such a
important.
helpful point. It can be so easy to kind of say, hurry up and fill your caseload, hurry up, hurry up. And then once you hit that moment when it's full, it's like, and now I'm done marketing, as your clients should. They graduate, they move on,
Right.
and then you go, oh no, where did all my clients go? So it is helpful to just make sure the rate of folks coming in is at least matching the rate of folks going out. I always say, like, slightly exceeding is
Yeah.
nice, and then you can always refer out.
Definitely.
Uh,
Yeah. I imagine you're doing more marketing in the beginning when you're establishing your
Absolutely.
practice, right? And so you can probably like do less marketing, but you don't want to stop altogether because then you have to start
Yes.
again, right? We surveyed therapists and asked if they pay taxes quarterly, which if you expect to owe $1,000 or more in taxes, the IRS wants you to make estimated payments quarterly, which is something we talk about at Herd and help therapists with. And only 44% of therapists surveyed said that they paid taxes quarterly, which means almost 60% didn't. And, if they're going to owe over $1,000 in taxes at the end of the year, that means that, they're going to pay fines and penalties that are unnecessary.
Yeah.
Getting more organized and staying on top of that is going to help you save money.
Absolutely. And as you say that, I can't help but think, maybe 60% of people listening right now or watching are thinking, wait, what quarterly taxes? What? That
Right.
could be its own episode. And I think we actually have an episode with Heard about that. So I'll link to that below if folks are just completely like out of the loop on what quarterly taxes are. But would you be willing to just give a little bit of a blurb of like, what is this quarterly taxes thing? If somebody's like, I've never heard of this, what am I missing?
The short answer is that when you're an employee, so when you have a W 2 full-time job, your employer withholds taxes from your paycheck. So every time you get paid, taxes are automatically taken out. When you're self-employed, so when you are a private practice owner, or even an independent contractor, if you're paid as a 1099, your taxes aren't being withheld by your employer. So you still have to pay those taxes. And the IRS wants those payments on a quarterly basis. So 4 times a year, if you expect to owe $1,000 or more in taxes, then you're required to make estimated payments. So these are just estimated payments towards your tax bill when you file your taxes at the end of the year. Kind of another interesting finding for me was that when we asked therapists if they do their own bookkeeping, 52% of therapists that we surveyed said they spend more than 2 hours a month doing their own bookkeeping, which 2 hours a
Wow.
month is over 20 hours, technically 24 hours a year,
That's a
right?
lot.
And if you think about if I charge $150 a session, I'm spending 20 hours a year doing bookkeeping, that's $3,000 in potential lost income if I had used that time seeing clients, right? So you're not necessarily losing $3,000 a year, but the time you're losing, that time that could be used towards generating income. There's definitely like an argument to be made for outsourcing at a certain point. Like if you're spending 2 hours or more a month, financially, it might just make more sense to outsource
Yeah,
that.
I like the way you frame that too, because I think so many people might say, "Oh, if I pay someone to do my bookkeeping, let's say, oh, it's so
Right.
expensive," and
$3,000 a year for bookkeeping? Like,
right. But to think, well, if you're spending 2 hours, and I saw there were a
right.
lot of people that spent way over 2 hours
Yeah.
on bookkeeping too. I was so surprised to think, well, if you could be earning $3,000 with that time, then it may actually come out ahead to um, outsource that somewhere, even though it does cost money, of course. Any other key takeaways that you want to touch on?
Yeah, just a few more here. When we asked therapists if their expenses went up year over year, I mentioned that 56% said that they did, 24% said that they didn't know, which to me suggests that they're probably not tracking their, their
Right. Right.
expenses, which if you're not, that's okay. I'm just,
It is okay.
it is helpful for, managing your business to just have a good sense of if your expenses are going up or not, because they can creep up on you. When we asked, how you're taxed, are you taxed as a sole proprietor or are you taxed as an S corporation? 11% of therapists said that they didn't know. So I think there's an opportunity for more education. Therapists aren't taught this stuff. And so that's why Herd is really committed to providing education and resources on these topics, particularly around taxes and how to navigate the whole process. And almost 10%, so 8% of therapists just don't do any bookkeeping, just totally avoid it,
Yeah.
which I'm sure makes taxes at the end of the year a
That's where
lot more
my mind
stressful.
goes, that what do you do come April?
What I've heard, therapists I've talked to who don't do bookkeeping, what they do is the weekend before they meet with their accountant to file their taxes, they print out all their bank statements for the last year and they go in and they highlight all of their business expenses and they try to calculate what their expenses were. And it's like a very
Wow.
stressful experience.
I mean, that sounds like my worst nightmare.
Yeah. So if you
I
can
kind of
avoid
almost
it,
admire it. I don't wanna do that. There's more than one path to paying your taxes, but some might be
correct.
smoother than
Yeah.
others.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like the road less traveled, but
Yeah.
not in a good way.
Oh, thank you. That's all helpful. And as you're naming things too, like you mentioned, people not being sure if they file as an S corp, or you're touching on some topics too that I got to speak with Andrew from Herd about as well. So if there's anything that we touch on that I have some other video with Herd on, which there's probably a few. I'll link to all of those in the description of this one if folks are curious, or you could just go to Herd and ask. If we stopped here, that already feels so helpful just to kind of be equipped with knowledge, but it might be nice to kind of poke at this a little bit more to see what we can glean from these results that you found. And so I'm curious to ask you, as Michael, you're very much entrenched in all the things taxes and accounting for therapists. And I'm wondering, as you saw these results, like, was there anything that surprised you the most?
The discrepancy between therapists who said they were going to raise their fees and therapists who actually raised their fees to me was surprising. I
Yeah.
understand why, which we've talked about. I had a conversation with a therapist this week who told me that he was afraid to raise his rates because he didn't feel like he was worth that premium fee. And it almost even felt like that if I raise my fees, then I need to be a better therapist. Like the expectations are
Mhm.
higher to be better quality if you charge more. So I understand that there's a lot of money stuff that comes up around raising rates, which is totally understandable. It's really can be difficult and messy to navigate.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective, if your expenses are going up and your fees aren't going up, your profits are going down.
You're
And
giving yourself a pay cut every year
exactly,
because of
even if you're
inflation.
just keeping the same, right? At
Yes.
least keeping up with, and that's why I think tracking your expenses is important, just so you know, like you're not losing money over time or your profits aren't going down.
Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting that bit about being most surprised about, like I said I was going to raise my rate and then I didn't raise my rate. What happened there? And that one story I think is so helpful. It kind of takes different forms, I think, for each of us, but the idea of like our emotions
Yeah.
getting in the mix, which the emotions are valid and we should give those attention and all of and think through how we approach these things with our clients. But also we are running a business, we're paying our bills and just like everybody else. And so if there's some way to kind of let the emotions be tended to separately, but to let math play a significant role in how we make business decisions as well, that can be useful. But I think it takes a lot of work for us to get to that point.
It definitely does. I mean, I think just practically the mindset shift of looking at it that way, right? Of like, if I'm not raising my fees to keep up with my expenses, my profits are going down. It just makes sense. I would just keep raising my rates. And so,
Absolutely. And I see a lot of therapists compensate by adding more clients to their caseload, which is
right.
just, I mean, that can
Yeah.
work
And if
maybe if you
you,
add one or two, but at some point you're
right.
going to run out of capacity and all of that. So,
Yeah. And if
uh,
you ultimately add more clients to your caseload and get to a point of burning out, then you're not able to help anyone, right?
amen. And I've seen it happen so many times. It's important to keep that in mind when we're saying, I'm scared to raise my rate. Like we can project into the future where we're burning out and kind of borrow from that future state and take some advice from our future selves who goes, oh, I wish I raised my rates back then. Anything else that surprised you in particular from the results?
It wasn't surprising, but just, the looking at income of therapists, I think it's just validating what we already know. Like we know that therapists are underpaid and undervalued, like I said, but then just to actually see those numbers, it is just validating what we already know.
Yeah. And I appreciate also that this survey was specifically with therapists in private practice, right? Now, I
Correct.
don't want
Yeah.
to misquote that. So, even within amongst therapists, there can be an idea that, well, if you work in the community or agency work, those therapists don't get paid enough,
Yep.
which is a true statement. But therapists in private practice, those therapists make a lot of
Right.
money, right? They still see that
Yeah.
you're charging the
Sure.
$200 and you must be pocketing all of that. And whatever the narrative becomes that, oh, those therapists in private practice must be making a lot of money. All the different narratives that can sometimes come with that of like, you're just greedy or you're after it for the money and all of that. So that feels important to clarify too, that even therapists in private practice are not
Right.
getting adequately paid.
Yeah. Only, 1 in 10 is making over six figures in profit.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really great distinction because when you look at the salary data for, salary positions in community mental health, right? It's like you're starting at $45,000 a year, which, is barely anything in the economy, especially for a master's level,
Right.
licensed professional.
Yeah, that's the part that's been it weighs heavy on me to see how many positions there are for starting therapists that pay the same as a lot of jobs that don't require a graduate level degree. Just from a math point of view, there should be more pay to account for the cost of going to school plus the delayed income because you spent some time going to school not earning income most likely. It's heavy for me to see that. Like,
Yeah.
how does this make sense? I don't understand, but it is the reality. So I wonder if there are any things that you think that therapists can learn from these results. I think we already touched on some of them, but what sort of kind of takeaways as far as learnings, ways we can grow, changes we can make to support ourselves well that you see from these results?
Yeah. I think that just as a baseline, if you're not tracking this stuff in your business to start doing that. And when we talk about bookkeeping, it doesn't need to be complicated. It can just be as simple as having a spreadsheet where every week or every month, you just track any of your income, any of your payments, whether it's, from your EHR or from Stripe or from insurance, like you're just tracking that income coming in and any business expenses, so any subscriptions that you pay for, membership fees, anything like that, so that you just have like a general understanding of how your business is doing financially. And then if you haven't raised your rates in the last 10 years, I think looking at that as well, just again, with through this lens of, if my fees haven't gone up and my expenses have gone up, my profit is going down and I'm actually taking a pay cut. So at least just like keeping pace with your expenses. And then I
Yeah.
think too, you know, being aware of how you're spending your time on your business, right? So
Mm.
if you're spending 2 hours or more a month doing your own bookkeeping, it might make sense to start look at outsourcing, whether that's hiring a bookkeeper or using a service like Herd. That's going to get you 20 hours a year back that you can reinvest in your business or reinvest in self-care, spend time
Go
with
to
your
the
family.
beach.
Yeah, you don't have to work with the time that you save, right?
Yeah, I appreciate all of those tips. And I like how you, and I don't know if you did this on purpose, but as you were describing the tip of, keeping track of all your expenses and all of that, and also making sure that, you're giving yourself a pay raise, basically. I could see how
Right,
those two things go together. If you don't even know the numbers, you might not realize just how your profits are dropping every
right,
year. Or I always like to emphasize, even if your profits are the same, it's still a pay cut because inflation.
right. It's a lot to think about, right? Especially if you're just starting out in private practice, you're trying to set up your business, you're trying to get clients, you're trying to figure out how to do therapy as a therapist and provide good therapy, right? And so bookkeeping and managing your finances like may feel like an afterthought, but it's never too early to get a handle on this stuff. And I would say like the longer you wait and the more that you put it off, the more difficult it is come tax time. That example I mentioned where you wait until the weekend before you file your taxes and then you're up all night looking through your desk for receipts, right? Even if you're not a numbers person or a math person, just like seeing how your practice is doing and growing over
Yeah.
time, I think can become something that people enjoy doing.
Mhm.
And, they actually like looking at their numbers because they can see, oh, my business has grown by 20% in the last year. And, it's something to really feel good about.
Yeah, that is so true. Are there any other learnings or things, takeaways as far as how to improve the health of our finances overall as therapists?
I think in line with just being aware of your time and how you're spending it, I think not being afraid to ask for help, also thinking about like what does reinvesting in your business mean? If I can outsource this, where else can I spend my time? I think when like we said earlier, spending, $200 a month, for example, on a service like Herd may seem at first very expensive, right? Like $200 a month, that would be one of my biggest expenses for my business. But if it's going to save me 2 hours a month in the long run, or I'm going to be able to save money on my taxes because I'm claiming more tax deductions, for example, then that expense pays for itself, right? So
Mhm.
thinking about like the money that we're spending, the opportunity for that money to save us money, if that makes sense.
That is an excellent tip. And I hear that tip from so many business-minded folks too, and then when you're in it in the beginning, it's like, "Oh, that feels scary." And I'll add a takeaway for me too, as I see these results, it does feel very empowering just to see what's out there, because something that I encounter, whether it's, consult groups or things like even the idea of talking to colleagues about like, "Hey, how much do you charge?" or "How much does that
Right.
insurance reimburse you?" It feels like I can't ask that question, and maybe a layer on top of that of like maybe I'm supposed to already know the answer. Does everyone just know and that's why no one's talking about it? And then whatever other narratives we kind of pile on top. And maybe a takeaway to add is therapists just feel more comfortable talking to each other about these sort of things
Right.
because it is different by city, state, and all these different variables that look different. It would be really wonderful if that was part of things that we consulted on and that it's not a shame-filled experience.
I think if this starts a conversation about finances more openly for therapists, I think that that's a great outcome.
Are there any more takeaways that you would add?
No, I think that we covered all of them.
I feel like we covered a lot of stuff today, and there's still even more. I know that we didn't talk about every single result from the survey. So I'll repeat again that if folks want to have the survey, Herd offers it as a PDF. So I'll link to where you can find that PDF. We've had you on and you've been educating us, but I know there's going to be some people who haven't heard of Herd.
Yep.
And so I wonder if you'd be willing to say a little bit more about, what is Herd? What sort of services do you offer if folks are curious to learn more?
Sure. Herd is an accounting software company built specifically for therapists. We really serve as your financial back office. You can connect your bank accounts, so it's going to pull in all of your transactions automatically. We have bookkeepers who will do your books for you. You'll get really easy to understand financial reports. We help you to estimate what your quarterly taxes are. Come tax time, we're able to do your annual taxes as well. If folks are interested in learning more about Herd, we can drop a link in the show notes. But we do offer free
Absolutely.
consultations as well.
Wonderful. And that will most definitely be linked as well. So all the things linked for folks
It's
to
going to
check
be a lot
out.
of links. Yeah.
Thank you so much for putting that together and releasing that. And thank you so much for coming on and giving so much of your time to share with folks here at Private Practice Skills. Well, thank you again so much to Michael Fulwiler and Herd for offering this helpful information, putting out this survey and compiling all the results. I really appreciate it. There was definitely a lot of stuff in there that I had never heard people talk about before or just like seen it published like this. Also, if you're catching this episode pretty soon after it releases, then coming up here on Friday, June 14th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, Herd is putting on a free webinar to talk about all the things you can do right now to set up your taxes for success. So I've also linked to the webinar below, add it to all the other links that I have in this week's episode. And before we close, I'd like to thank therapynotes.com for sponsoring this video. Therapy Notes helps with all of your practice management needs from scheduling to notes to billing. They have a HIPAA-secure telehealth platform and so much more. If you'd like to check out Therapy Notes, you can get 2 months to try it for free with no commitment just by clicking the link in the description of this video. Whew, well, I can tell that this week's episode is extra long because it was so action-packed. We covered so much information. So thank you, Michael, for offering all of this information and your time to us. I hope you found something encouraging, educational, supportive that you can bring with you in your practice and your life as you go forward. And until next time, from one therapist to another, I wish you well.